I am going to be critiquing an astrologer named The People's Oracle. She posted an article explaining how why astrologers use the tropical zodiac to erase the radical legacy of MLK and Muhammad Ali. Now, to be fair, she posted this like 5 years ago, so it's a really good chance that she doesn't hold the same views anymore, but it is still up on her website, which, means that she endorses it, at least to some extent. So just wanted to give that disclaimer. Now, I'm not going to comment on Ali's chart, but MLK was a socialist, and for me, as a Marxist, he's of particular interest to me. The People's Oracle claims that if you read MLK's chart using the tropical zodiac, then his radical politics will get erased. She also claims that the tropical zodiac centers men, patriarchy, and the individual. So as a Marxist who uses the tropical zodiac, I am going to critique her claims. So who am I? What credentials do I have to say any of this? My name is Underwood. I am a certified Hellenistic astrologer. If you want to know more about my certifications, check out the description. I am also a Marxist, which means I'm deeply invested in the interest of the working class. And I believe that private property, private ownership is the root of all evil. First, let's talk about why astrologers are doing when they are reading charts. A chart is confined to a reader's level of awareness. If the reader cannot grasp the material conditions of the native's life, then the reader is not going to do a good job at interpreting their chart. This is because the reader doesn't have enough context. The reader doesn't have enough information about the factors outside of the native's control that are influencing their life. So you can't ask a liberal to interpret a socialist chart because they do not have enough historical context. So a person who has white values, and notice I said white values, not white people, they are going to project their perspective and their ideals onto a person's chart. So liberals have white values. What are white values? Extracting resources, claiming ownership, designating people and things as merely possessions that you can extract whatever you want from it. The values that you see emerging from the colonial powers in the 14, 15, and 1600s. Now, an American liberal, they're going to take their American education, their idealist values, they're going to take their capitalist, colonialist, and imperialist understanding of history, and they're going to project it on a chart. This means that for people who reject the status quo, when liberals read their charts, they're either going to interpret them as number one, being a bad person, or number two, they'll project their own ideals of this person onto their chart. Let me give you an example. A wealthy astrologer cannot read the birth chart of a person in poverty. That's because that wealthy astrologer lacks an understanding of the economic conditions that poor person lives in. Are they thinking about the food deserts the native could live in? Are they thinking about the healthcare costs that the native has imposed on them? Are they thinking about the police presence in the native's neighborhood? Are they thinking about the lack of job opportunities in the person's neighborhood? Are they thinking about the housing discrimination in the person's neighborhood? You just can't interpret what you don't know. Another example, an American astrologer cannot read the birth chart of a Korean person because number one, there's a lack of cultural understanding. And number two, there's a lack of the political, economic, and social climate of Korea. The American astrologer may not know that it is a cultural norm to live at home with your parents in adulthood. They may not know about the severity of the housing crisis. They may not know about the expectation to work overtime in Korean companies. They may not know the extent of Confucius values on society. And just like that, a liberal cannot read a socialist chart because the liberal has a lack of political understanding. So now let's get to the fun part. I, a Marxist, am going to read fellow socialist MLK's birth chart. Now, before we can even begin to read his chart, we have to acknowledge that he has a birth time of 12 p.m. An exact birth time. Now, it's not impossible to be born exactly at a certain time, but rounded birth times are extremely common. So we may or may not have his correct time of birth, which means we may or may not be working with an accurate chart. But this is what we have, so we gotta work with it. We see that the sun is at the end of Capricorn and it is preparing to go into Aquarius. That means that the sun is about to enter its detriment. So if we use the sun to symbolize those in power, the government, the social order, or the way that things are, we can see that these things are becoming dysfunctional or corrupted in King's life. He was blackmailed by the FBI. he survived an assassination attempt. He was labeled as an enemy of the state, and then he was ultimately assassinated. Now, the moon is entering into a malefic enclosure. That means that the moon is about to be beat up by Saturn and Mars. The moon represents the body and a person's health. And Saturn and Mars are forces that make life harder. In fact, Saturn is the planet of death, and it's literally in the 8th house of death. So what happened in his life? He survived a suicide attempt, he survived an assassination attempt, and yes, ultimately, he died before his time. He was assassinated. His first house lord is exalted and in the 11th house. The first house lord is another name for chart ruler. Now, in traditional astrology, the 11th house represents freedom from constraints. Have you heard that the 12th house represents prisons? Since the 11th house follows the 12th house in primary motion, the 11th house represents being released or freed from constraints. This is also why the 11th house is the joy of Jupiter. King was jailed 29 times, which also means he was released 29 times. And one of those times he was released from jail, he was actually released by the Kennedy brothers. Now, in traditional astrology, the 11th house can also represent gifts and donations. It is a place of privilege, or where one receives opportunities. Now, of course, we are not saying that King was a privileged man, but it is absolutely a privilege to be released by politicians. King was also a Nobel Prize winner, which is one of the ways we see that 11th house theme of professional opportunities showing up in his life. Now let's go back to talking about Venus. Because he is a Taurus rising, Venus is going to represent his personality, his behavior, his habits, etc. Now, even though Venus is exalted and in the 11th house, it's in a really great place, Venus is applying to both of the malefics. Saturn and Mars represent themes of rejection, denial, destruction, and termination. And this is how we can see that his politics were deeply unpopular. We can see that Venus, as noble as it is placed in his chart, the climate that Venus is in is not accepting. It is not pleasant. It is not helpful. The malefics are actively working against Venus, which is to say the world in which King grew up and lived and worked in was actively working against him. As I just showed you, the tropical zodiac can really get it done when it comes to reading a socialist life story. It is not the tool that is the problem, it's the reader. The People's Oracle has a problem with the tropical zodiac because she says that it centers the sun. And since the sun represents men and patriarchy, this is a bad thing. For many reasons, I have a problem with that. So now I'm going to critique her justification for rejecting the tropical zodiac. She says that she rejects any astrology that centers the sun as the most important planet in the chart. And she doesn't like it because the sun is the mind and men. She may reject the sun, but the solar system does not. Astronomically, the planets revolve around the sun. It is not astrologers who are saying the sun is important. That is space. That is outer space. And astrologically, there are way too many things that only exist because of the sun. Houses, retrogrades, aspects, the moon's phases, sect, and perceiving the planets, like literally being able to see the planets, literally their light, the light that reflects off of the planets is only possible because of the sun. We would not have astrology if not for the sun. People have used the sun as an anchor in which they've developed their societies. The sun is quite literally central. Like there's just no other way I can say that. Now when it comes to a birth chart, no, the sun is not always the important planet. In fact, if you study traditional astrology or if you study Vedic astrology, we have a ton of different techniques that lets us know what's the most important planet in a chart. It is not always the sun. In fact, in Hellenistic astrology, which is what I practice, when a person is born at nighttime, the sun is actually de-emphasized and the moon is emphasized. She says that she rejects any astrology that centers the individual over community, or that refuses to accept that the individual is shaped by and emerges from the group. And honestly, it sounds to me like she should study traditional astrology or Vedic astrology. Because in modern astrology, which is the most common type of astrology, it centers a person's mind or a person's psyche. So it centers the individual. So rarely are we looking at the different factors outside of the individual's control that shape and inform them. Whereas in traditional astrology, we are viewing the native within the context of the world around them. Now, one of the really big things I have a problem with is she is projecting a whole bunch of additional meaning onto the tropical zodiac that is not inherent within the zodiac. She says that the tropical zodiac says that our experience of the sun from Earth is the most important. The tropical zodiac does not say that. That is what she is saying. The tropical zodiac is simply a reference system. The sun is used as a reference to locate other planets in the sky. Why are we using the sun? Is it because the sun is men and that means men are the most important? Or is it because the sun is patriarchy and that means patriarchy is most important? No, the sun is used because of how reliable it is. Year by year, the sun pivots in the same place in the sky every quarter. What I'm describing is the equinoxes and the solstices. These are reliable and unchanging. This means that the sun is mathematically stable. We can use the sun to reference other things because of how stable the sun is. And this is not to say that the tropical zodiac is superior. In fact, I actually think that Karl Marx's birth chart under the sidereal zodiac is much more vivid of his life. The tropical zodiac simply emerged as a response to precession. That is it. The sun wasn't strategically chosen because it represents power or individualism. It was used because it's reliable. This does not mean that I want her to stop using the sidereal zodiac and switch over to the tropical zodiac. That's not what this video is about. But I think that she should reevaluate her reasoning for why she uses the sidereal zodiac. There are much better reasons to favor the sidereal zodiac than that.